welcome to my video. I wasn't gonna do this, but I guess I'm gonna do this. Um, so if you guys all remember, or people that have been using Linux for a while, will most likely know what down small Linux is. Down small Linux was a very small Linux distribution, like small in size, based on Canopix, which I use heavily a lot back in my when I first started using Linux. Well, I've been using Canopix way before down small Linux, but after a year or two, I discovered down small Linux, which was based on Canopix but a lot smaller. And back then, when it came to USB media in the early 2000s, we didn't have big like size USB sticks. Like they came in very small format. I think the highest at the time that I can remember was maybe 128 megabytes. So like I used to burn a lot of CDs all the time to, like try out Linux distributions. Back then we had to burn them to burn the ISO on the CD and pop them in. I had a whole collection of distributions on CDs, like in a box. Like I had a lot. Like I don't know what happened. I think I threw them in garbage. I had like a whole bunch. I should have kept all these medias because it's kind of like history, of Linux. But I just threw them away because it was just garbage. Like it's just everywhere. It's all over my room, my desk. I was just like, man, I don't use these anymore. Because when flash drive came about, it just was so much convenient. And Dan Small Linux was one of the first distributions of Linux that actually you could put on a USB stick. And it started on the early days of things that were, yeah, the memory sticks were small back then. So yeah, so you could put Dan Small Linux on a USB drive, and it was kind of buggy at first, but most times it worked quite well. And to me, it was useful because um, sometimes like you just can't always get CD-ROMs, or you just tired of burning stuff all the time. So like putting on a USB stick was very convenient, and Dan Small Linux was great for that. So my little introduction to Dan Small Linux, that's the reason why I started using Dan Small Linux a lot. And this is actually the distribution that introduced me into Fluxbox. And I'm going to fire it up, and you're going to see why I like Dan Small Linux. So it does not work with okay, I'm gonna just power this off. So it does not work with Debian. Isn't it? It's based on Antix. Antix usually uses. Isn't it based on Debian? I thought it was. Let's just try 64-bit Linux. I don't know. Let's try this. So I think it can. I don't think it would load. Okay. Settings. So system. It could probably. I don't think it can load into EFI. That's probably what the problem is. So I think it's Debian 64. Let's just try that. That should work. But EFI mode, no. So let's load this up. So you know how I used to say like MX Linux and Antex kind of reminds me a lot like Dan Small Linux and Canopix a lot. Well, it's kind of similar. This is a very small little This looks nice though. I'll give it credit. This does look like Dan Small Linux that I remember of. Let's just. Oops, no, I do it. Stretch mode. So yeah. Terminal. Does it have NeoFetch? No, it doesn't. Does it use app? It does. So app sudo app install NeoFetch. Well, that worked. So let's try it now. So it is based on Debian, Bookworm 12. Debian 12 is using, it's a 32-bit system. That explains probably why it doesn't use UEFI. So this is basically made for 32-bit systems. Interesting. So, yeah, down small Linux. Let's see how this install looks like. Very much like MX Linux and Antix. I didn't look like this back in the day, though. It was very different. This is not the Dan Small Linux I remember of, but it does have a menu for Flexbox, which is pretty cool. This thing, what happened? Okay, so that's show everything on the desktop. So it has volume control. And you can switch workspaces. Yeah, Dan Small Linux. It's like, okay, this does. This Dan Small Linux had something like this. I remember it had something like this. So I see. This is Alex Parents, pretty much. Don't know what that is. System manage packages. Huh. System live session. Well, that's well, it has something similar to this. Yeah, Flexbox 7 styles. I don't know. Yeah, this looks a little bit better. What kind of? Yeah, I really like Dan Small Linux, and I really do like Flexbox. I actually kind of miss Flexbox anyway. But yeah, this was pretty convenient, and it was one of the Flexbox where you could have icons on the desktop, which was pretty convenient as well with Flexbox. But as far as I would use it nowadays, because Dan Small Linux was pretty useful back then, like for storage that wasn't we didn't had a lot of storage, so Dan Small Linux was great to fit on a USB stick. And one of the first distributions to boot up on a USB stick and install Linux on a USB stick, which is now basically the standard that we use in today's world. That's one was also pretty good because I liked that it introduced me to Flexbox. And Flexbox with Dan Small Linux, it really felt like a Unix environment. It felt like a really nice, true Unix system, and it was pretty unique. I really loved Canopix back then, which was based on Debian. So basically, like Antix would be close to what Canopix was back then. I don't know why they didn't with Canopy. I think Canopix is still around. I think they still make. I think they're still around. I mean, I could be wrong, but this is basically is Dancemal Linux. I mean, when it comes to the desktop, it was like this. They always had these steampunk sort of wallpapers, and they always had Fluxbox, Conky as So that's why I think like a lot of systems like Antix and um, MX Linux were all inspired by Downsmall Linux. Like even when I made my Tuxhat Linux distribution back in the day with Arch Linux, I used Fluxbox heavily and always talked about Downsmall Linux, and I tried to make the system as small as possible, which was probably around 700 megabytes. I mean, that's pretty much what you can cram in with some software nowadays. Because back then, you could actually had a full fledged desktop with 50 megabytes or 100. It was they say 50 megabytes, but they had I think most of their ISO was like 128 megabytes because of what I had was 128 megabytes, which was the one I put on a flash drive, and it worked quite well, and it done me quite good. Um, and it actually worked because like back then, like when you had hardware in the late '90s and early 2000s, a lot of Linux distribution did not really work on any desktop. Like it was really fussy. Like we're actually kind of spoiled a lot now. Like we have a better Linux kernel has been updated a lot with drivers. Like we have a lot of support. Back then, if you think Linux is rough nowadays, it was really rough back then. When I first started using Linux, man, it was rough, like very rough. So Downswell Linux was one of the distributions that actually worked good on my PC, like with sound, with network, internet, everything. And so I heavily used Downswell Linux because it just ran really well on my computer, and I just really love Fluxbox. And because of this distribution, they're the one that introduced me to Fluxbox, and they had all kinds of different flavors of Dance Linux. They had like after step style Dance Linux. They just had a lot of different types of Dance Linux, and I used them all. And I was like really into after step and all these other like Dance Linux style systems. And I just was really a big fan of DSL, and it's nice to see they're back, but I don't really see the point of it nowadays. But hey, it's still around. It's cool. It gives me memories, but would I use it nowadays? Not really. I'm not really much of a Debian fan. I mean, I don't hate Debian, but I'm more of an Arch Linux user. I discovered like better Linux distributions over the years. I mean, Gentoo been around too, like is around the same time as Dance My Linux. But back then, I tried out Gentoo. It's just that it was very complicated. When I first started using Linux, like I did download Gentoo, and I was just like, oh, it's in a shell, in a console shell. Like, what do I do? This is way too advanced for me. So yeah, I mean, like nowadays, like I can use Gentoo, but back then when I first started using Linux back in like 2002, yeah, it was very advanced for me. But I always told myself in the future I'm gonna get back to Gentoo, and here I am using Gentoo as my main system. So I did got back to it eventually. I still use Arch Linux, don't get me wrong, but I do like Dance Linux. Like I don't really see the purpose nowadays, but in a way it's still good because there's a lot of 32-bit systems, and this will work really well on 32-bit systems. And you know what I mean? Like there lot of like distributions are going all 64-bit only, so I guess in a way it is useful for now. But eventually, when 32-bit just completely gets like ditched, I mean, I guess they can always develop for the 32-bit systems. But in the future, 32-bit systems are just going to be very legacy computers. Like it'll be like for niche hobbyist users like me. I do have a lot of computers that would benefit with the system. Um, but even like older systems like Pentium 1 systems and 486 systems, like this probably will work okay. I'm not sure about 486, but Pentium 1 and Pentium 2's Core 2 duals and stuff like that, like yeah, this probably will work fairly okay. Anyways, that is my little rant and my little video on Dan Small Linux. Yeah, I am quite inspired by it a lot. Would I use it today? Not really, but the name DSL 2024, they should just call it DSL. They don't have to include the year, but I guess that's what it's called now. All right. Hey, it's cool. It's cool to see it back, and it gives me a video to make and talk about and just share my love with Dan Small Linux when I was younger in my early 20s and using this system. Yeah, I quite like Dan Small Linux a lot. It was one of my favorite distributions. Actually, it actually really got me to like Linux a lot. Because it was one of the systems that actually worked really well on my PC. So that way I got to use Linux more and learn Linux more. So because the Dan Small Linux is basically one of the stepping stones that kept me using Linux. So yeah, that is that. I'll give it that. And I always talk about Dan Small Linux, and people knows me well over the years and in the Linux community. They know that I do talk about Dan Small Linux a lot in the past. And when I made my Arch Linux spins, distribution spins, I based it a lot on Dan Small Linux and the simplicity. And I love Fluxbox. So I use Fluxbox heavily. I used to write Fluxbox a lot. And it's because of Dan Small Linux that got me into Fluxbox as well. Because, yeah, they're the one that actually introduced Fluxbox to me. So I didn't know what Fluxbox was back then. And Dan Small Linux is one of the... Well, I mean, I did use Blackbox, but I never used Fluxbox. And Fluxbox was actually pretty cool. And from then on, when I started using other distributions, I would always install Fluxbox. And that was all because of Dan Small Linux, because I got used to using the desktop, and I really just like Fluxbox. And I still do like Fluxbox. I just think it's great. I think the way they done their desktop is really nice. I like that they still use Fluxbox and they're keeping it real. Anyways, I can rant on forever, but yeah, it's pretty cool. Thanks for the watch, guys, and have a good one. Cheers.